Hello, Andrew here again, and today we're moving a little deeper into the Christmas story. Certainly the one we understand. And we're picking up the narrative at Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 to 8, and today's episode number 216. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for it has been written by the prophet, And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out from you shall come a ruler who was to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." In many ways, this is one of the most romantic parts of the Christmas story. The visit of the wise men is only found here in Matthew's Gospel. Often there is identified as being three of them, because they brought three gifts. And often they're referred to, because we sing the carol, "We three kings of Orient are." They're kings, but they're obviously high up officials, they're dignitaries. And it's possible that they could have been quite a large party. I've read one that suggested even up to 30 people. So who were they? They're usually referred to as the Magi. These were learned men from the Persian court. They were well educated, perhaps specialising in astronomy and astrology. This was an age where astrology was a thing, not as we might see it in our newspapers and magazines, where the minutiae of our daily life is laid out in terms of the people we're going to meet and how prosperous we're going to be. But there, the stars were regarded as picture books, telling meta-narrative stories of what was going to happen, the great sweep of historical events. And they became to be believed that they were prefigured in the stars. Now, the ancient Hebrews believed this also. It also seems likely that these Magi were Zoroastrian. Zoroastrianism was a monotheistic religion, as far as I can tell. Rare in its day, being monotheistic, and it didn't have a huge following. And they were the worshippers of Ahura Mazda, the god of light. From memory, from the little reading that I've done on it, it would indicate that this was not too far removed, really, from the Judeo-Christian understanding of God. And this is particularly true in centuries when most religious systems were polytheistic. It seems that there was an expectation throughout the civilized world that a ruler was going to emerge, a great king out of Israel. And the ones with apparently no expectation of this was the Jews, the Jewish people themselves. One can imagine the excitement of the Magi as they'd been watching the stars, reading the books, discussing the meaning of the signs and times with other scholars, and finally heading off on this great adventure. If it had been a sizable party, this may have required a considerable amount of organisation, months of preparation, and finally they're on their way. One can imagine the conversations that they might have had as they travelled. Maybe a little bit surprised as they encountered travellers coming in the opposite direction and hearing no news of the birth of the great king in Judea. Yet they pressed on. Imagine, though, their dismay when they arrived in Jerusalem and found the city in business as usual mode. No news of the birth of the long-awaited king. In fact, given the paranoia of the aging King Herod, this would have been a dangerous thing to talk about. One of the worst gifts one could be given by Herod the Great was to be named by the king in his will. His sons and others who were named in his will usually didn't long last last long after the event. How awful then for the Magi to discover that there was apparently no such birth, no identification of the great king, no celebrations, nothing. Interestingly, Jesus anticipates his return will follow a similar pattern. He will come back when people least expect him. Just like his first advent with the people of God, the sense of expectancy was extremely low. And we see why. Everyone is caught up here in the mood of the current king. Where his emotional state goes, the whole people go. Just as well, isn't it, that he didn't have a Twitter account? We notice in verse 3 the effect of the Magi in telling their story. Herod was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. All Jerusalem was frightened because Herod was frightened. And Herod being frightened made him particularly dangerous. He was an old man, certainly in their day. He didn't have long to live, and he in fact died soon afterward. This didn't mean, though, that he wasn't dangerous and could still do considerable damage and cause a great deal of misery, which, as we'll see, he did. It has a kind of contemporary ring to it, doesn't you think? Anyway, Herod does not treat the story of the Magi lightly. He takes it very seriously. Herod summons Israel's religious scholars and asks them the question, where is the Messiah to be born? The Messiah? Who said anything about the Messiah? Oh, that you conclude that this newborn king is the long-awaited, long-hoped-for, long-expected Messiah, God's anointed one? This is where Herod's mind goes. And Herod's been clearly doing the sums. Surely this expected king can only be the Messiah. What other kind of king would people be waiting for? What other kind of king would the concern of prophecy and the stars be all about? As it is, the scholars are all unanimous on that. It's Bethlehem, not too far from Jerusalem. That is the prophesied birthplace of the Messiah. And, as we will discover, Herod wants to kill the Messiah. Just invite you to sit with that for a moment. What kind of person is so committed to his own self-interest, his own dynastic ambitions, that he'd be willing to track down and murder the long prophesied, much longed for Messiah as a newborn baby? Seriously, it's worth thinking about. The king who would put all things right, this Messiah, the one who would usher in an age of unparalleled peace and prosperity, not only for his own people, the people of Israel, but for the whole world. Wow, you want to kill that Messiah as a baby? Right. What kind of person would want to sacrifice that messianic future to his own petty, narcissistic ambition? Herod would. He's that kind of person. Ugly, isn't it? Nothing much changes. Yep, the story of the birth of the King of Kings has dark political undertones to it, doesn't it? Yet, here's the good news. While the covenant people may not get it, those who would and should be first to recognise and understand what's going on, again, nothing much changes. And yet, there's a small group of foreigners, people willing to stake their reputations on a conviction that God is good and had gifted the world with a great king who would ultimately put everything to rights. They made the journey. We celebrate their faith and courage. And their faith will ultimately be rewarded. The one born to be king will eventually put everything to rights. God bless you.